Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. For you gold members, I apologize. There's a bit of a mess up or mix up, my fault, for last Thursday. So I'm going to do another private Zoom this Thursday night, 7:30 Eastern Time. Join me there. I promise the link will be there this time. Just again, my mistake. So I apologize to those of you who wanted to tune in for that and didn't know where the link was. So now you know. You'll be there Thursday. Anyways, there you go. So, and I hope the regular members who tuned into the private Zoom on Wednesday, hope you enjoyed that. Had a good 40-minute discussion, a lot of questions answered, a lot of topics discussed, a lot of things that I probably would not address on here. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed that. So for today, I'm going to do my 5 things I think, and really kind of leading into the combine. The combine, of course, begins this week, excuse me, in Indianapolis, and Adam Peters will talk to the media on Tuesday. Dan Quinn and Lance Newmark will address the media on Wednesday. So not expecting them to say a whole lot. They're not, they typically don't. And they're not. Listen, this is a group that keeps things very close to the vest. So, I'm going to get into my first item in a minute when it kind of relates to a lot of this, but just remember that they keep things close to the vest. Adam Peters does not say a whole lot and tell people a whole lot. So always keep that in mind when you start to read a bunch of rumors that get out there. So anyways, but the combine's this week, big week for Washington, and I'll get to more of that in a minute. So let's get to the first for the 5 things I think. First one, I think people need to be realistic as we approach free agency. I know they have a lot of cap space, and I've talked about this before, but I think I'm going to keep kind of hammering this home because I don't look at this team as going out and spending wildly on one or even two or one player or maybe two, right? I look at what they did last year as kind of a blueprint for what they'll do this year. And I think it's going to be a lot of guys in that Biadish, Luvu type range, guys who maybe are not top tier when they're signing them, but guys who can be very productive and impactful, because both Luvu and Biadish were for sure. And then the Dorrance Armstrongs, guys like that. So I think that's the level I would look for because I think they're going to be active. We know they have to fill out the roster. I'm going to emphasize again, when you see all this cap space they have, always understand they have 28 undrafted free agents. So that's what you have to keep in mind. They have a lot of roster spots to fill out. And who we'll get into as we get closer, who I think they'll keep, or we'll have discussions on just some of the key guys, what I think will happen with them. And but anyways, so I think you need to be realistic. Like I said, I don't know that I see them right now going out making that huge splash signing. I think if you did that, you're probably feel that you're a lot closer to having a complete roster for what you want. But also, again, they have a lot of spots they need to fill. And I think that's kind of a big deal. So we'll learn more about all that stuff this week because this is a week in Indianapolis where a lot of rumors start to formulate or a lot of things start to percolate for sure. But again, just understand with Adam Peters how quiet he likes to keep things. And I think when he's doing negotiations with people, that's also kind of the case. And you look at a lot of the guys that signed last year. Now, some of the guys were kind of obvious, Dante Fowler, guys like that. Biadish was a natural one. So there are a few guys that were kind of natural signings for them because because of how they were aligned, just the relationships they had with some of these players. So some of those made sense, but not everyone was ones where it's like, oh, okay, that didn't see that one. There weren't a lot that you knew at this time were going to happen, right? So just keep that in mind over the next few weeks. Number 2, I think the combine's huge for 2 reasons. And I'm going to have Logan Paulson on Tuesday just to talk it's probably about a 10 to 15 minute interview with him about the combine. And some of it is like some funny stories about what guys did to add weight back in the day or how they would try to boost their weight when they're at the scale and how they try to manipulate so they can get to, instead of being 6 foot, maybe get to 6'1", little things like that that can help their draft stock and maybe, how much water they might drink, et cetera. So I'm going to talk, but also the importance of like some of the drills that he looks for as well, and little things that people watch for during there. Like I remember talking to coaches about pro days and just how the little things they pay attention to that is not measured by, oh, he caught this 40-yard pass or threw this ball over here. It's really about, okay, how is he with the teammates? How is he, I remember talking to one coach before about like when you're at a pro day, and I know it's a little bit different than a combine, but it's similar setup, right? So is a guy always in the same spot going through drills, or does he go like second one time and fifth another time? Is he always wanting to be first? How competitive is he? So those are little things that you pay attention to that you're not going to pick up on with the stopwatch and all that. The stopwatch stuff is great for TV. I think it helps, but I don't think whenever you talk to people about the combine, it's not what jumps out. You're like, oh, I can't wait to see this time or that time. And the other thing is, the funny thing is, like with some of the stuff, that everything is you don't always have to send all your people there because so much is televised, and also you get the results. But you do want eyes there to see how people react or how they interact, and this is why. So one thing to know, like every player they drafted, or every player who drafted or made it as an undrafted free agent, Sam Hartman, Tyler Owens, those guys were all interviewed at the combine. So that was every single one of them was interviewed at the combine. So if you want to start like who are they interested in? Well, obviously, if they're talking to them at the combine, there's interest. So all but one, I think all but one had the combination of the pro day and the combine. So again, they talked to him at the combine, they attended their pro day. The only one they didn't do that for was Dominique Hampton, but that's because they saw him at the East West Shrine game as well as at the combine. So they didn't do the pro day for him. But that's again, look for that. And then as far as like top 30 visits, only three of the guys they drafted last year had a top 30 visit. Of course, Jaden Daniels was one, Brandon Coleman, and there's Javante Jean-Baptiste. So that is an important one, but again, it's you look for those combos. It's combine, pro day, combine, pro day. So when you start to see it, that can kind of help narrow down the list based on last year. And there's other things that go into it as well. It's just that's one little factor for it. But the interviews and the medical history or the medical results are very big. And that and the interviews are the big things from the combine. So I remember there were two guys who were here from before the past regime who I know absolutely stood out because of their combine interviews. And then it was also meshed with their play on the field. So one was Quan Martin. And I remember talking to people at the time just how good he was, how impressive he was in his interview, and how he could tell you. And part of it is because, obviously Ron Rivera had the ties, knew Lovie Smith, and Quan had played for Lovie briefly at Illinois, but he knew what that defense was about, Ron did. And then he knew how well Quan Martin could get up on the board or talk about his responsibilities within that defense and how it meshed with what others did, et cetera. So that's part of the reason why they drafted him, was because of how impressive the interview was. And to be honest, in talking to him throughout the last couple of years, you see the exact same thing when you're talking in the locker room. Like he knows, he's really good at explaining what he needs to do, what happened on a play, what he's seeing, et cetera. So he's a very intelligent player. And you could see that at Illinois, but it also came through in the interviews. And the other one was Sam Cosmi. So, the old adage is if you want smart, tough players, if you want a smart, tough football team, you draft smart, tough players. Well, that was Cosmi. So somebody had told me he wasn't like the typical Texas offensive lineman. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, but they did say he was tough and physical. You saw that on film. And I think one of the things that jumped out to them in the interviews was that he understood that how important it was to be physical. And like that was to him the most important thing, and that resonated with them. So those are two guys who were successful draft picks from the previous regime, but those are two areas where they stood out, and it started at the combine, or that didn't start at the combine. It continued and escalated at the combine because clearly you would have interest in them from watching them on film. And then I remember talking one time to, but this is where sometimes it's hard to always know where's this guy going to go, because there was one time I was talking to a team about a linebacker, and this is a guy who played, this is from, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. But this linebacker went into the meeting room and he was great. Like he could tell you exactly what he was supposed to do on the play, exactly why he filled this gap. He was where he was supposed to be. He knew why. He knew that he knew where he needed to be. But then if you ask him about like, well, why did this guy do this? He had no clue what that guy's job was in the play. This guy, no clue what his job was in the play. So you're not sure, like, is he an instinctive playmaker or is he just really understand on his assignment? Can he be more than that as linebacker? Well, it turns out this guy, I don't remember who this was, but I know he played a long time in the NFL. So, but the point is I remember talking to a team at that time, like you come away from that not knowing which direction is this guy going to go based on the interview. Very impressive, could mean this, but if he doesn't, does he understand the other stuff? Does he need to understand the other stuff? If you're a linebacker, a lot of times you want them to, right? Especially in the middle. But if you're a weak side backer, well, that's a little bit different. So, anyways, just some of the things that come out there, and obviously the other thing is you start to, um, the other one was in 2021, the combine was canceled. So they go out and they draft Jamin Davis in the first round. And it's funny because I remember again talking to these guys last over at that time and just how they felt he looked like, what he felt like they looked like on what he looked like on film. But one of the things with missing the combine is losing that interview and then the ability to also not just talk to them, but read body language when they're giving an answer. Like that's a big thing. And I think that was something that I think they wish they had had that with him. Now, maybe they still draft him. Clearly it wasn't the right pick. There were other guys they could have had, Jeremiah Coromono or Christian Darrisaw. So that would have been a really good pick too. But they clearly made a mistake with the pick. And partly I think it stems from, hey, you didn't get to have that full interview. Like that year and that COVID stuff really impacted a lot of things. Like even like with Dwayne Haskins. I don't think Dwayne Haskins is a starter if they had a full spring and summer to measure what he really knew with this offense. So, but missing that played a big deal. So, but having the flip side was the 1 year with Cam Curl not having that, like he wasn't able to get in front of the board or have those interviews. It's why he fell late in the draft, and it's why this team could get him late in the draft. So, anyways, that being said, the combine's important, but its interviews are really, really important, and the medicals are vitally important as well. So, number 3, I think Kliff Kingsbury. I I think he did a tremendous job with Jaden Daniels this year. We've talked a lot about that, but here's why I wanted to kind of stay on that because you look at what he did versus what Chicago did with Caleb Williams, and I only bring this up because I just happened to be talking to someone else in the league who knew this situation, or you certainly with new Kingsbury, and he brought up just how impressed he was with what Kingsbury did with Jaden, and he said the big thing that to him separated this place from Chicago is you had Kingsbury went to LSU or talked to the LSU coaches and just picked their brains about what they did with Jaden Daniels, what they did with him, why they did it, what they felt he did well, and kind of built built this offense around his strengths. So, but it was, he talked to them on a fact-finding mission, and it helped him develop and build this offense around Jaden Daniels. It wasn't a college offense per se. It was a very good offense, but it was built around what does Jaden Daniels do well, and that's what they did. Conversely, with Chicago and Caleb Williams, what this person was saying too, like he said, what he saw too much of were elements of the Green Bay offense with Shane Waldron. With the offensive coordinator Shane Waldron, he didn't coach in Green Bay, but there was a similar offense. So he just felt like the Caleb Williams, what he did well, didn't necessarily fit that offense. And rather than kind of tailor more to Caleb Williams, it was trying to kind of nudge him into an offense that that wasn't best suited for him, and that led to problems. And that's also the difference between a guy who was experienced in Kingsbury, a smart hire to get that for a young quarterback, versus an inexperienced offensive coordinator in Waldron last year. And it just shows you how important it is to have a good support system around a rookie quarterback, right? And so I think that's one of the things Washington did, but it's something that I hear, and I just want to bring up to you again, and as to why this person said this, because it's something that you definitely hear that they really, I think people like how this organization was built and what they built around Jaden Daniels for sure. So, anyways, that was something that was pretty big. And the other thing this person was saying too, like with Jaden Daniels, everybody keeps talking about, well, defensive coordinators are going to study him. They're going to do this. Well, what do you think these guys are going to do? They're going to start and build off of what Jaden Daniels did this year and try to anticipate what defenses might try to take away with him next year. He'll do the same thing. So while defensive coordinators are doing this, it's not like this team is not doing anything. You can go back to 2013 with Robert. Part of the problem was coming off a knee injury, but also you had in the coaches' minds, what you heard at the time was they had a quarterback who didn't quite understand exactly where he was in his development, regardless of the knee injury. And so, there were things that they wanted to build off of that they didn't feel they could. And people, Robert can disagree with that if he wants to, fine. That's what the coaches said. So, anyways, it's different this time around because I think with Daniels, there's just more things that you can build on. I think he's just further ahead in his development as a passer in the NFL, way more than where Rob was to build off that kind of a successful first year. So I don't think I would sit there and worry about like, oh, defensive coordinator is going to do this because they're going to be doing the same thing to elevate Daniels. And if all goes well, they will surround him with better talent next year. So there you go. I think we need to consider that this free agent class is not necessarily considered a really strong one or deep one. So I think keep that in mind when you start looking at what things they might do. And again, I do expect them to be active because they kind of have to be. They're going to sign a lot of their own guys back. And I would certainly expect some of those to happen before free agency so you don't let them get out there. I would definitely, but again, a lot of that stuff starts to take place this week when you get talks between when you have the agents there, you have the GMs there. That's why a lot of stuff happens this week. But I think you have to consider just the where this class is at and is the kind of impact guys that are out there. And when you look at like defensively, I know there's going to be talk about Josh Sweat. And I think Josh Sweat will be an interesting one. I'm curious to see what happens with him, where he goes, whether this team is interested or not. And when I've talked to people, they're somewhat mixed on not necessarily him, the player, although there's a little bit, but it's also like what the cost might be. Is it worth for what he offers? Can you get somebody in the draft? Could you, again, we've talked before, like, my take on I wouldn't want to add a lot of guys who are in their 30s, mid 30s, Khalil Mack, for example. However, if you did that, if you went out and signed a Khalil Mack, get him on a 1-year deal, let's say, and I don't know that this is even possible. This is spitballing for sure. But if you did that, then I would want to draft a guy in the first round because one of the things that you'll hear is with young pass rushers that it does take a year or two to mature into being, to making an impact. So but I think if you go the route of always trying to fill with 1-year guys, you're always looking for that guy. I think you want to get a young guy at that spot. But if you did an older guy with the younger guy to develop, and then it bolsters your front, and then you have a guy the next year who ideally would take over as that guy, right? So, anyways, but with Sweat, I was talking to a couple guys, like, he makes plays late in the down. So when, in other words, his motor keeps going. Somebody who coached against him was like, I really like him, but that's a lot, meaning what it would take to get him. And then somebody else wondered, hey, he's playing with some really good players, and if they felt like Nolan Smith may have been better, but the other two guys inside him, how much did they elevate his play? So those are questions to ask about it for sure. Now, what that means for who's going to sign him, I don't know, but I do think like he's going to be an interesting one to watch, and because he's a player at a position that this team needs, but is he going to be that kind of guy? And when you talk to people about like when you look at defensive ends in this group or for this defense, you want someone who can do, who can set the edge, right? And not just it's whether, when you have Bobby Wagner is not going to run the same way he did 5 years ago. We can all acknowledge that. I think he would acknowledge that, but he's still a very, very smart player and can play in the area. So, but you're going to need someone who can kind of give him a little bit of help too. Now, one thing that would help him, I think, and it's funny because I talked to someone else about this, like how the tackles, they felt like they needed to be more disciplined in their gap assignments. And because sometimes they're watching this defense, say like this is way too big of a gap for one person to fill. And so, that's one thing to watch. But with the defensive ends is to get upfield a little bit more. And whether or not you're forcing it back inside, if you can bubble it out, if you can bubble the ball carrier out, well, then that gives the linebackers more of a chance to get outside and help make a play or whomever. But when you're not being able to do either one, then there's a problem. And I think you can go back to that Philly game and Dante Fowler on that first run by Barkley, like that was messed up. And he ended up taking out Bobby Wagner because he starts up field, sees where it's going, spins out, trips up Wagner, and then boom, there's a gap there that one of those two could have filled. And then, yeah, there were missed tackles down the field, but it started with the defensive end not doing the assignment or not helping on that play. So, anyways, we'll see what happens with him, but I think that's going to be something to watch as well. And I think the other thing is we're going to talk a lot about the offensive line and what could happen there. And I think it's interesting there for not because they need an overhaul of that group. They don't. And I told you before the season that they like that group more than what the public realized. That was before the season. Now, at the end of this season, you can look at it. It's kind of hard to look and say you don't and say like, hey, you can run with this group next year for sure. I think you absolutely have to look for more help inside, whether you get someone who's going to challenge for a starting job or win the starting job or just add more depth. You need to keep building that. When you have 17 game seasons, you need to do that. And plus, here's the other thing. This is, the last couple of years, they have those late buys. Well, it gave that group a chance to rest up and get ready for the playoffs. Well, I have a feeling that they're going to get an early to mid buy at this time. So you want to have that depth just for that late season push when it's hard to keep guys healthy in that kind of scenario. Anyways, but I think we've talked about this before, but Brandon Coleman gives you that flexibility. You don't have to sign somebody because you do have a guy that you can play with at that position at left tackle. So do you have to go out and get one? Is Cam Robinson really that much better than where Brandon Coleman is? Or would you rather, Alaric Jackson is a guy is he in that kind of Luvu Biadish type role where maybe he's that kind of a guy that you bring in. But again, you don't have to. Like, you don't have to force it, in other words. So, but if you do get someone, you can push him inside. A lot of people I talk to really would like him at guard outside of here. But the point is, he's got that flexibility. And the reason it's talked about a lot now is because, again, they don't need the overhaul, but you do anticipate them doing something there, whether it's in free agency or the draft. And if they go the draft route, that's great because now you get young guys that you can develop with the Coleman, with Biadish, with Cosme, who will still be here, and so I think that's a good way to go. And keep in mind with Wiley, while yes, he would save them $7 million or so if they cut him, he's also only going to count a little more than 10 million on the cap this year. So it's not an exorbitant fee for starting right tackle. And so anyways, the point is I'm not necessarily sure what they're going to do with free agency there, but there are options. And I think the draft is a good option for them because there is some good talent at those positions with guard, tackle, et cetera, guard tackle types that could either play inside, play right tackle, whatever. So I think there's options there. So be curious, but I will be curious to see. And I think the one thing, it's funny because the one thing they have to make sure they do is when you're studying and analyzing guys is like, okay, if you don't have Jaden Daniels as a quarterback, what happens to how is this game viewed by the tackle? Now you're obviously going to measure by just his assignment, how they do their assignments, but Jaden Daniels bailed a lot of these guys out at times. And you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to assess where everybody's at, because, and the linemen knew it. They would tell me like, yeah, some of the stuff was the same as last year. It's just that this guy got out of things. But again, I don't think you need an overall, but you do have to account for, you do want to bring in more competition for sure. Then you have to account for Sam Cosme being out, we don't know how long he'll be out into the season. So you have to account for that with some level of move and building depth, if nothing else. But I would expect that to be something that they clearly touch on because they have talked so much about building up the lines that I do think they'll do something there, whether it's just about adding depth, adding competition, whatever it is. So, anyways, but this week we'll start to formulate stuff for draft, for free agency, etc. Again, I will have Logan Paulson on tomorrow talking about the combine, and I'll be back also on Thursday after hearing from Quinn, Peters, and Lance Newmark. Just a little discussion about things that, based on what they've said and how to interpret some of what they said, et cetera. So stay tuned for all that. And as always, I appreciate you tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.